Welcome to the Randall Report. That's news to me, episode 4.
Hey, welcome, Mel. How you been?
I'm good. How are you, Sam?
Yeah, not bad. Enjoyed my holiday, but we'll talk probably a little bit more about that at the beginning of the next one because, as we know, that's news to me. We've got about 30 minutes to get to the bottom of how many subjects we can, but max 10 minutes, of course. So I'll avoid talking about the obvious one, which is, of course, our present government. So first up of today's subjects is, of course, Putin's annexation of 4 regions of Ukraine. What do you make of the whys and wherefores of what's behind his timing of this? And, of course, what looks to be a bit of a, how can I put it, a corrupt vote. I mean, 98.23% voted for it. And from what I gather, many of them at the point of a gun. What do you make of this? What do you make of it all? How legitimate do you think it is, since he doesn't even control all of those 4 regions?
Well, according to media, he doesn't control those 4 regions. I think the reality is probably slightly different.
Well, he controls part of them, I guess. Part of each of the 4, but not all. Well, we know from the towns and places are being retaken, and I noticed this morning's news.
Who's told you that?
You've got to stop this completely one-sided thing that everything that Putin says is correct and everything that the West says is.
Well, no, exactly, and the line sits somewhere in the middle, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're all fucking liars.
Well, there you go. So, I think in terms of the referenda. I think it said one region had 98.2, another region had 84%.
Oh, right, okay.
So I don't think it's sort of 98% across the board, but still it seems a little bit exaggerated, and that's fine and fair enough. I think definitely when it comes to Donetsk, for example, it's ethnically Russian for the most part anyway. So I think there was, much like Crimea, there is a more Russian tilt anyway. So we can leave that.
We all know why that is.
Okay, fine, but we can leave that. Yeah. We can leave that to one side. So the reason why Putin has, decided to push for these 4 regions to become essentially ascended into the Russian territories is because he's using that as military leverage. Because essentially what he is saying is that this is now Russian land. So if there are any Ukrainian forces on Russian territory, it then gives Russia carte blanche to wipe the enemy out because they're on Russian territory, not on Ukrainian soil anymore. So that's where the logic is.
But where's the logic?
Hold on a second. The logic is also to ensure that NATO, then doesn't cross any further lines by saying, if now Russia recognizes this new territory as Russian, NATO can't step into Russian territory because then that would essentially escalate things to a new level that nobody wants.
I mean, excuse me for saying this, but of course,
and only Russia and a few other countries recognise the new expansion.
Which other countries? Because China doesn't.
You say that, but China, Brazil, and India, they didn't ratify the UN treaty the other day. So it's a tacit agreement. And these are not small countries. This is half the world.
No, but India and Brazil, particularly, one thing is not ratifying a UN resolution or
it's as good as the United States.
But it's another thing when China has what has clearly happened over recent weeks. weeks is starting to distance itself further and further. And actually, this in the last few days called for a different direction, and has also said that they do not agree with this annexation of the 4 regions.
There's what they say to the West, and there's what they actually do in reality, and usually they're 2 very different things.
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's very clear when the diplomatic or the language is. I mean, if it was all no sod you, what he's doing is correct, then obviously that would be a different matter. But clearly, they're China, weaving a much more diplomatic and
China's also amassing troops, on the southern Chinese border, waiting for something to happen before they try to take Taiwan. But no one's saying anything against that.
Yes, so, and obviously that it's only recently that China and Russia relations have improved. So let's not pretend for a moment that all will necessarily remain sweet.
Agreed.
Between the two.
No, that's of
and
course.
History obviously tells us that from alliances that existed around in previous major wars, not least the Second World War.
But China is no friend of the West, and neither is Russia. So obviously they come together.
Let's be about right. China is Billy No Mates as they sit on the world stage. Generally.
Well, no, which is exactly why they're seeking alliances elsewhere. It's a bit of a kick in the teeth to the West that India, for example, has made its stance very clear, and so has Brazil.
Yeah.
The US was hoping that at least one of those countries, would have ratified the UN treaty, because it would have been a far better showing on behalf of the West.
I'll tell you what I would say.
Yeah.
If I was the British government, and in fact the British people need to be demanding it, frankly, it would be I would make sure, if I was in government, given India's position, that was the end of all the aid that because we've been giving them fortunes worth of aid every year from this country, even though they've got their own flaming space program, which I find utterly bizarre, that half the Indian population are living really in substandard conditions, and yet huge sums of money are being wasted on a space program, and we're handing out aid to them when people here are using food banks and struggling. It just seems to me to be an absolute paradox.
We should also make note that over the course of the war, that Russia and many other countries have been pushing for an agreed negotiation, but it's odd.
On Ukraine?
On Ukraine, but it's odd that the West seems to be pushing for more war.
Why do you say they're pushing for more?
Well, because you would think that given the dire situation that we find ourselves in, that the US, the West, Europe would move to try and organise some sort of negotiated settlement, even if that includes cessation of some land, ceding some land. However, at the moment, it looks like the only interest is to fund the war and to cause more sort of destruction. I don't quite understand it.
I can't entirely agree with your vision of it, because obviously, as we've seen before with Vladimir Putin, first it was Crimea, and let's be about right, international spectators, experts on elections, referenda and the like, determined that the number of people that actually voted in the Crimea referendum was basically numbered a pig in a poke, frankly. It was nothing.
It was about 30-odd%.
Exactly.
Same as British elections.
No, British elections roughly stand at around
30%.
60 to 63% of the vote. Well, I can find you the statistic. Most elections, don't get me wrong, obviously the Brexit referendum was much, much higher because it actually...
because it affected all of us.
It affected all of us. But the average British election, roundly speaking, although it's been somewhat less in recent years. It's still been around 60 to 63% of the voting population that have taken part. And so you've got to question the. We could get into a big history lesson over Crimea, but I am sure the West's position over not negotiating a settlement with Russia is little bit these four reasons. What will it be next? We've had Crimea, and then it's these four. What will come after? Will it be the annexation of Belarus? Notwithstanding Putin's own speech. He, in his speech, his annexation speech with his rock concert and all the people that were busy being paid to wave flags to support him, if that's your point of view, of course.
Where'd you get that from?
He said that the Soviet leaders, which I assume he was referring to Gorbachev, had no right to give away the Soviet countries during the period in the early 90s, the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, that kind of sends a message of what his intention is, and perhaps why there isn't going to be a negotiated settlement to give away a bunch of land to Ukraine, because he'll be back for more next week.
Based on
that's I think the take on it. That's my humble opinion anyway, because that was his language. It's like somehow that something had been taken off from what was the Soviet Union, and they had no right to do it, which I find is, let's be about right. Half of those countries, the Soviet Union, have no right to be in the first place.
Much like Russia giving away Alaska for $400.
Well, they sold it.
That's also a mistake, is it not?
It's a mistake, but they sold it.
Okay, but it's a mistake.
If you sell your car, your beautiful car that's worth $100,000, and you sell it for $2,000, you can't go back a week later and go, "Oh, I've had a change of heart."
But it's a mistake. So giving away a bunch of land is also a mistake.
Well, it's
so he's just making his own opinion.
He's making his own opinion, but he's actually also making really kind of some clarity as to his intention. And we can already see that from his actions. So anyway, I dare to say we've used our 10 minutes up. And it kind of moves us on conveniently to the next topic, which is North Korea, of course, having fired its first, I think it's Kherson type missile over Japan, which of course landed neatly in the Pacific. What do we make of that? First missile they fired in 5 years, and it's supposed to be in because of the military manoeuvres that are taking place
between the US and South Korea. Exactly.
And I think Japan's involved too.
Probably.
Yeah. What do you make of all of that? What do you make of Mr. Kim Jong-un, who at one point, very briefly, was Donald Trump's mate?
Well, I mean, essentially, this is another country that's sort of seen as a pariah state. Mm-hmm. The only way they have to protect themselves is to use military might, which is exactly what they've done. Well, what other choice have they got exactly? Mm. There won't be a negotiation between North Korea and the UN or the West. That's never going to happen. China supports North Korea to the hilt. So essentially, China probably said, if you want to test a missile, go ahead. We give you our blessing. Just make sure you don't go hit any land or any people, because it will be a big problem. And so it's another missile test into the water, just to show that, hey, we're still here.
Yeah.
Don't get too close, because we know what we're doing. We've now shown and proven that we have nuclear armaments. So I mean,
yes, there was a school of thought.
Leave us alone.
There was a school of thought that some years ago, when they were doing all those military parades, that the missiles had that look of being cardboard.
No, I think some were though. So I think some were genuine and some were obviously manufactured, which is...
The giveaway is one of the missiles at Amazon written on the side.
Yeah, you laugh, but they still have nuclear weapons.
Yes, they do. I think
so. It's not that much of a joke.
Well, no. I mean,
No.
for all of us, it's getting a bit weird, I think.
Well, always, in my opinion, it was always that every country should have a nuclear weapon because it would level the playing field automatically, wouldn't it? Would it not? If everyone had a nuclear weapon, it sort of keeps everyone in check.
Well, it's an interesting argument to use. It's
Either no one has them or everyone has them, and that should be sort of a global policy.
Yes. Well, of course, the no one has them routine is very hard to sort because,
Israel, for example, who doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Yes, there is a good point. Israel, which has maintained throughout that it doesn't have a nuclear arsenal.
In the Golan Heights.
And it really kind of appears that it clearly does. So, it's the one that's tucked away in the back of the drawer, if there was none. But why do you think it would be safer if everyone had one each?
Well, you'd have less aggression, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
for example, if Ukraine had a nuclear weapon,
would
Russia be so quick to take military action against them? Probably not.
Well, arguably they do, because weirdly, I remember going back to the 90s, and I don't know how much that situation has changed.
They have silos. They don't have.
Ukraine had a lot of nuclear weaponry left behind by Russia. Now, whether that there was a tale going on, I think, in the early noughties, where it was thought that Ukraine had perhaps sold these on to despotic regimes,
much like the HIMARS that were given by the US that have also been seen on the black market of recent times.
Yeah.
The Ukraine aren't quite so.
Well,
no. So clean themselves.
Don't get me wrong. No, I don't believe any country is.
No, but the Ukraine is adept at selling weaponry on the black market. It's kind of what they do.
We don't sell it on the black market, of course. In Britain, we sell it openly.
Yeah. To the Saudis and whoever else will pay.
Yes, exactly. And then so they can go and delightfully, but any Saudi princes that are listening, no, I won't be visiting your embassy. I don't fancy being put in lots of different boxes.
I mean, for example, this is exactly why, we like to invade countries that tend not to have nuclear weapons.
But it's easier, isn't it?
It's a lot easier, isn't it?
Yeah. What I find,
but Russia and China is less likely to happen because there's always a threat that you're going to be annihilated. So it's not so good.
What I find, a bit of an aside before we move on, what I find rather odd is the fact that with Saudi, we sell them all these arms. They go and then bomb the hell out of Yemen. And then we are littered on our TV screens with adverts begging us to give our hard-earned money over to look after the Yemeni refugees that are suffering as a consequence of the arms we sold Saudi in the first place.
Going back,
seems a bit cockeyed.
Going back to North Korea very quickly, as with all countries, they have the right to self-determination.
Yeah.
You might not like what's happening there, which is fair enough, but the way you deal with these things is through diplomacy as opposed to sanctions and threats, because sanctions and threats have never worked.
No, it clearly doesn't.
Look at Russia, look at North Korea, look at Iran, and many other countries. Yes. Sanctions simply don't work. It's a good way to oppress a people and not a government.
Well, I think the idea, isn't it? It oppresses the people to the extent where they go, God, I don't want none of this. Let's get rid of our leaders. And I think that's the idea behind it. Instead of which, what we end up with, as we've seen most tacitly in the recent events with Russia and Ukraine, is that it kind of undermines our own situation a little bit, so we want to get rid of our own leaders. So it kind of works slightly in reverse, but hey, there you go. So I guess really it takes us now onto our final subject. Who blew a hole in Nord Stream 1, or sorry, several holes in Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, which is the gas pipeline that runs through the Baltic, I believe, to feed to Denmark, Germany, and the like. Russia is blaming America. America is blaming Russia. What do we think about it? Because I've seen a lot of stuff on Instagram and Twitter, and of course, where there's a, it seems to be fairly spliced down the middle.
I'd
Some
like
are
to
saying,
hear.
oh, it's the Americans, they did it.
What's your opinion? I think we start with you before I obliterate your opinion.
That's nice, isn't it? Yeah. He's going to blow a hole in my opinion rather than Nord Stream 1 and 2.
Because we're definitely not going to agree. So you may as well start.
I'm not going to say I have the answer on this one, because I don't think anybody really knows the answer to this question. Because really, the whole point of whoever did do it is that they didn't want to get caught. Clearly, it was very organised. Clearly, it's got to be down to either the Russians doing it themselves in order to blame America for doing it, to give them, again, more leverage, maybe.
And more sanctions.
Or maybe, well, of course, if the sanctions don't work, Russia doesn't really care about those. I mean, really, how many more sanctions can we put on Russia that aren't there already?
Well, plenty, apparently. There's 120 separate sanctions this round.
Okay. Well, to put aside, what kind of things do they involve then? I thought they'd fairly covered it all.
So it was politicians. So some politicians had sanctions placed on them, as well as their family members as well.
Oligarchs, of course.
Some oligarchs and a few more companies have been sanctioned and put on essentially a blacklist.
Right, okay.
It's 120 in total or something like that.
So anyway, getting back to, you were asking what my opinion is before you blow me out the water. So that was my thought if from the Russian perspective. I kind of wasn't sure whether, if America's done it, what the reasoning would be, other than to make sure that the Germans this winter, or another country this winter, doesn't undermine the West's position by going, oh, it's too fucking cold out, we need to buy a bit of Russian gas, can you please send us some? And thus weakening the alliance, because obviously the name of the game, if you like, was to starve money from the sale of gas.
Failed.
Well, of course it is, because she's just sold it to someone else who is willing to have it at a cut price. Which, of course, it's like anything in this world, isn't it? There's always going to be somebody who'll buy it at the right money, and overlook any principles. So that was my thinking. I can't say categorically that I think it's the US or that I think it's Russia. I simply don't know. I've simply been trying to work out who the bloody hell would really think that it was a good idea to do it.
Well, okay, so if we look at who has more to benefit, if you look on the Russian side, Russia, all they have to do is turn the taps off, which is essentially what they did. So where's the benefit in then blowing up their own pipeline?
So they can blame America for doing it, because it would look less likely that it would be them, and that it would be argued that the West is escalating the situation, and that way Russia can seek, Putin can seek to get better support that might be waning at home.
Support from whom?
From the Russian people. That it would be somehow a direct attack on Russian interests, and because his popularity is waning in at home, this would perhaps help to rekindle.
What do we mean by
that?
Waning?
Would be my view.
What do we mean by waning? He has around 80% support.
Well,
for this war.
Where's the proof of your the percentages?
Because it was 92%, and now it's down to about 80%. So at the beginning of the war, it was around 92%,
and 70% of them
Today
are only saying it because it's like they don't want to end up out of a window.
Today it's about 80%.
Yeah.
According to Russian sources, let's be clear.
Exactly.
Russians, well, RT and Al Jazeera.
Yeah. I mean, one's got to be very careful how you bandy about percentages.
That. But the issue is, Simon,
because
is
when
that
people don't support, and invariably, there's a catalogue of them, have ended up falling out of windows. There seems to have been a lot of falling out of windows. We're not
talking about hundreds of thousands of people, though, are we?
No.
It's not people. There's not like a line of hundreds of thousands jumping out.
But the fact of the matter is, there's more than some 100,000 that have crossed the borders to avoid the conscription. So
yeah, of course, because they don't want to fight. The same would happen in any country, Simon.
So you can't tell me that this thing of popularity.
The same would happen anywhere. If there was conscription tomorrow in this country, how many millennials would end up fleeing for fear of actually ending up in a conflict of some sort or another? Let's be serious.
Too fucking large to run faster.
Let's be serious. You know, most people would run for the hills if they thought they were actually being conscripted.
Long as they know there was a fried chicken shop on the way.
And let's talk about this for a second. When it comes to conscription, the people who are being conscripted are not going to the front line. This is also a misconception.
No, we know that.
Okay, so they are more than likely not going to face, any kind of military action. They're there to replace the actual armed forces that will be going to the front line and probably looking to take more territory into Odessa and to secure their existing borders,
which doesn't seem to be happening.
So these people who are being conscripted are mostly going to be within Russia, and they will replace those that will be going to fight.
Are you trying to tell me that
these people have got nothing to worry about because they're not exactly going to go front line and have to fight? Because number one, they don't have the training. You're not going to send, unlike in the Ukraine where they're sending, essentially teenagers and geriatrics.
Well, it's no different to what we did in the First and Second World War. People of 14, 15 and 16 you're going off to fight.
But we're not in the 1910s and 1940s anymore.
Well, you say...
But when you have...
You say we're not, but things aren't much different.
Well, yes, they are. Military technology is... taken a few steps forward.
The military technology might have taken a massive step forwards, but the willingness of political leaders to use their populations as cannon fodder, I don't believe has changed one sodding bit, frankly. Anyway, I guess we'll never really know until somebody...
The Americans did it. And the reason why they did it...
I'm not convinced.
And the reason why they did it is because it ensures their own gas production gets sold to Europe at almost double the cost. So it suits them down to the ground.
They were always going to sell their gas production
at double the cost just to make a healthy profit.
They were going to sell it because Russia wasn't going to sell it.
On the backs of Europeans.
Well, it's all on our backs. Let's be about right. They're talking now, as you know, about a shortage of gas supply this winter in the UK, folks. And to make matters worse, of course, much of our electricity is generated via gas-powered stations. So I'm afraid what we all need to do is get stocking up on those candles.
Can we talk about very quickly, and it's a little bit off topic, but there's a company in the UK that produces power from wood pellets.
Oh, yes, I have heard of it.
You've heard of this. Yes. It's one. It's a new form of technology that's being used in an anaerobic system whereby they burn wood pellets.
Yes.
And the gases that are created turns turbines, creates electricity.
Yes.
Now, this company that has been given $6 billion in green funds has now been accused of essentially cutting down ancient forests in Canada.
Oh, great.
Turning that into wood pellets.
That's all we need.
Sending it into the UK and then burning it. And then they also get green credits for the pleasure. and the government seems to be doing this knowingly.
Well,
It's an absolute.
It is cockeyed.
It's an absolute
It is
shambles. But anyway, sorry, a bit of an aside.
Well, yes, that's quite all right. Well, we are bang on the time. That's not bad. And we didn't manage to completely fall out with one another, although you think America is what done it. And I am not sure. I'm not going to pin my colours entirely to the mast, because I have to say that you could well be right in the scheme of things. It is certainly wasn't a clever thing to do.
Oddly enough, I think your point was very succinct to say that it would make sense to blow up the pipeline to ensure that Europe wouldn't try to circumvent sanctions and try to get gas from Russia.
Yes.
So I think, at least on a political standpoint,
yeah.
It ensures that sort of there is no way that
I don't think it's an economic move. I think it's purely a political. Whoever's done this, it was a political move. So
but this makes more sense.
If it was Russia, it was to make it look, in my view, to make it look as though the West was having an absolute attack on Russian interests, and therefore help Putin to shore up support, because it's very clear that things aren't going as well for him as he thought. There's been all sorts of talk in the last week that he's not leaving the country because he's frightened of what they call one of those coups that takes place when somebody conveniently goes away for a week and they go, right, he's out, let's... and he comes back to a bit of a surprise. But equally, America will have done it if they did it from a political point of view to ensure that there's no backtracking as the winter starts to bite. Anyway, on that note, we will bid you good day from the Randall Report. Until next time. Thank you to all who are listening or viewing the Randall Report. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Please do subscribe. It is absolutely free. What is it, Mel?
Free.
And of course, you can contact us via the following email address, therandallreport@gmail.com. There's also our Twitter feed, @Randall_report, and Instagram, _Randall_report. So subscribe, hit the notification button, and do feel free to leave us a message, and we will do our level best to reply. Until next time, wishing you all peace and happiness. Be kind to yourself and others.